let's say 2 or 3 months. They put together a list of the suspects, one of whom is still alive, living in Las Vegas, Tommy Andretta, and we'll get to him later, hopefully, if we don't run out of time. But in any event, Bob Garrity was the case agent in charge of the investigation. He attended a book signing of mine in 2005 when the paperback came out, and Bob and I became fast friends. Bob had written a memo called the Hoffa memo, and in that memo he listed 9 suspects. 8 of those 9 literally were the entire group of conspirators that were involved in the killing of Jimmy Hoffa in that hit. The 9th was the brother of one of the other 8, and so it was presumed if his brother Sal Bergoglio was involved, then Gabe had to be involved, but Gabe wasn't involved. And so the FBI had solved it, and they put pressure on all of those people that were involved in the conspiracy. The FBI just could not and had no way of knowing what happened, how it went down, who did what, how was Hoffa even killed. They had no way of knowing that. They just knew from their informants, from their underworld informants, they were getting sources who were telling them these are the 8 involved. Russell Buffalino and Frank Sheeran were at the top of the list of the 8 involved. And Tony Provenzano, Tony Giacalone, Tommy Andretta, Steve Andretta, Sal Bergoglio, and Chucky O'Brien, who had an Irish name but was Italian. That was the 8. There's the 8 of them. And anyway, the FBI went after all of them and got them for other crimes, the way they got Al Capone for tax evasion. And they ended up getting Frank Sheeran for labor racketeering and giving him a total of 32 years in jail. Someone else would have gotten 3 or 4 years for that. But they were determined to put enough pressure on these people, hoping one of them would crack. And but they're barking up the wrong tree with Frank Sheeran. The FBI would visit Sheeran once a month and tell him in prison he's got the keys to the jail in his pocket. All he needs to do is cooperate with them. And he said you had to go and meet with them when they summoned you into prison, but you were allowed to just turn around and walk back out. And so he just turned around and walked back out. And as he was aging, his arthritis, he had severe spinal stenosis where you've got an arthritic spine. And he was having trouble walking. He was his right leg was starting to wither. And I was doing medical malpractice work, and I got a call from the Philly mob. They wanted to see if I could get him out of jail on a medical release, early parole. And he would get his surgery and his aftercare. And, at that age then, he was in his early 70s, not be 71 years old, actually, not be a problem for anyone. So I represented him and got him out of jail. And in representing him, I had to get tough with him. I had a younger partner at the time, Bart Dalton, and Bart went down to the prison to get Sheeran to sign papers that we needed in order to file for early parole. And he returned telling me that Sheeran wanted to sue the warden, wanted to sue the 2 trial judges, the prosecutors, the FBI, the police officers, and he was just ranting. He was ranting. So I went down to the prison. It was about 50 miles south of Wilmington in the town of Smyrna, Delaware, and I went down to the prison to talk to him and to explain to him that the procedure that we were going to use of early parole on medical grounds would be a one-sided procedure. The prosecutor's office would never know we were there. It's done at the jail with people sitting as a small parole board who are civilians that the warden appoints. And the warden doesn't want to have to take care of an elderly man with severe spinal stenosis surgery. They're happy to get rid of you, to get you out of the jail. But the second you start suing people, the FBI is going to get wind of it, and they'll make sure you never get out. And while I'm talking to him, he's just glaring at me. And when I'm done, he goes on this monologue, this monotonous monologue about how he wants me to sue everybody and his brother. And I let him roll. When he was done, I said, Frank, I wish you could hear yourself talk. Then you'd know you weren't making any sense at all. We're filing for medical parole as we've been paid to do. If you decide you want to sue all these people with this screwball idea you have, you do that after we're done, if you can find a lawyer stupid enough to do it for you. I'm leaving this paper. If it's not signed next week, then I'll know you don't want us to represent you. But if you want us to represent you, my partner's coming down here in a week to pick it up. Guard, we're out of here. So my partner went down the next week. He comes back, and he says, oh, God, Charlie, it was unbelievable. I'm worried about you. All he would talk about is you. He never gets talked to like that. Nobody's ever gotten away with talking to him like that. Don't forget, he had Goronsky killed for coming late to a meeting and spilling wine on him. This thug, Fred Goronsky, he had him whacked. And we could never prove it, you know. And I said, yeah, and he was involved in the Hoffa suspect, too, because by then it was pretty well known. He'd been profiled in the New York Times and Newsweek, and there'd been 6 books written about him, that he was involved somehow in the Hoffa disappearance. And I said, well, this one counts, I guess, then. We better get him out. Well, of course we got him out. That wasn't a problem. But my stock went way up in his eyes because the mafia was used to telling lawyers what to do. They weren't used to being told what needs to be done by the expert, by the lawyer. And he took us to to lunch, rather, at Vincenti's restaurant in Wilmington, heard on FBI wiretaps as the Wine Shop. And I had written a novel called The Right to Remain Silent. The detective Lou Razzie was an ace master interrogator, and it was based on homicides I had solved, true stories, homicides I had solved through interrogation. And but it's fiction. But I could point to the cases and say that's State v. Fullman, or that's State v. Clark. Anyway, Sharon took me aside after the lunch and said that he had read my book in prison and that he was tired of being written about in all the books on Jimmy. He wanted to tell his side of it, and he wanted me to tell it. And this may sound strange to your audience, but I knew immediately that this man wanted to get something off his chest. The way I had spoken to him in prison, he knew he wasn't talking to some patsy. He read my book. It's a pro-law and order book. And it actually dramatizes how interrogations should be done. Now, if you don't want to risk confessing, you don't want to talk to me. This was 1991, and we ended up scheduling a meeting at his apartment in Springfield, Pennsylvania, which, by the way, is the same town that Al Martino was from. And Al Martino was a bricklayer in Springfield and a World War II veteran wounded in Iwo Jima. Anyway, so I go up there to meet with Frank Sheeran, and he answers the door. He was using a cane then, and I see this chubby man behind him wearing a suit, and the last thing you want is another person. You want to be there alone with your subject. And he says, this is my lawyer, Charlie Brandt. This is my other lawyer, Jimmy Lynch, the Catholic. That was his name. And he puts his hand out, says, hiya, Charlie, how you doing? So I figured, well, the worst that'll happen is I'll get material from these two characters that I can use in one of my next Lou Razzie book, So I'm in the bathroom, and the phone rings, and I come out, and Sheeran is hunched over the phone, being very respectful to whoever's on the other end of that phone, saying, yes, yes, yes. It turns out that the guy on the other end of the phone was the underboss of the Buffalino family, a guy named Billy D'Elia, Big Billy D'Elia. And Sheeran says to Jimmy Lynch, the Catholic, that thing, we got to go do it now. Now? Yeah, well, you don't do it when, and Sheeran stammered, so I'm imitating him. You don't do it when you want to. You do it when they tell you, and they don't give you no notice either. Well, what are we going to do with Charlie? I said, guys, I brought work from the office. I'll sit right here at the dining room table, and I'll work until you guys get back. And Sheeran said, no, he's coming with us. Oh, God. I'm off for a ride somewhere. It has something to do with the mafia, I'm sure, you know. So Jimmy Lynch is driving. Frank's in the front seat. I'm in the rear seat. Turns out it's the seat that Jimmy Hoffa was in when he took his last ride in Detroit, the rear passenger side. And I'm sitting literally thinking to myself, you know, if somebody's going to this is a setup, and somebody's going to hit Frank Sheeran because he's now out of jail and maybe knows too much, and they're afraid he's talking to me, we're all going to go. I mean, they don't just kill Sheeran, you know. I had no idea where we were going. So we get to Mona Lisa restaurant in South Philly, and it turns out that what it is it's closed. It's a mob trial. Billy D'Elia, the underboss, was there representing Frank Sheeran. It was like a civil trial. Sheeran felt that he contended that when he went to prison, there were two guys who were collecting loan shark money for him, and they claimed they gave the money to the prior Philly boss, a guy named Little Nicky Scarfo, and that they collected each week from the loan shark victim. And Scarfo sent word back from jail that they never gave him the money. So Sheeran, had these two guys on trial. John Stanford, the then boss of the Philly family, was the judge. Stanford's underboss was their legal representation, the two torpedoes who Frank felt owed him money. And Frank was represented by Billy D'Elia. And I'm sitting at the bar, Jimmy Lynch, the Catholic. The bar is open, it's free, and there's Italian food and at a table near the trial. The whole proceeding lasted 5 hours, including getting there and getting back to the apartment. And we get in the car afterwards, and Frank is elated. He'd been drinking his red wine, his Chianti, and he said, "Look at the respect they give me. They only do this for Italians." The two torpedoes were ordered to pay Frank $1,500 a week until he told them that they could stop. And I'm in the back seat, and then Frank says to Jimmy Lynch, the Catholic, "Franny's got problems, Jimmy. Got nothing to do with me, nothing to do with this, but Franny's got big problems." And I knew Franny. Franny was the guy that brought me the fee when Frank was in jail, and Franny was at our table, at the celebration when Frank got out of jail at Vincenti's restaurant. Franny had raised a toast to Frank, "May the feds leave you alone." And I'm in the back seat, and I hear Franny's got problems. And Jimmy Lynch doesn't like it. Jimmy's going, "Franny's good people, Frank. I hate to see anything happen to Franny." And Frank is saying, "Look, it's out of my hands." And they had this conversation the whole way back to the apartment. So 5 hours have elapsed, and Jimmy Lynch, the Catholic, true to his name, said, "This whole thing about Franny has me upset. I'm going home, going to bed." And now I'm sitting there with Frank Sheeran. He's sitting on a lazy boy, and I've got him to myself. Practically his first words were, "People don't think the FBI knows what the F they're doing. The FBI knows what the F they're doing." And he substantiated the Hoffa memo, which I confess I had never even heard of. I knew very little about the Hoffa matter, and other than that Frank Sheeran was a suspect. We all knew that.